Welcome back to On Call Plus Autism, a special hour of GMA Now. We're going to turn to three parents who know all too well about dealing with autism's challenges. Here in New York, Ken Rybel is a business writer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His 13-year-old son, Christopher, who was diagnosed with autism at age 3. Actress Didi Khan found fame in the classic 1978 musical Grease and the beloved PBS children's series Shining Time Station. She adopted a son she named Danny in the early 90s, who was diagnosed with autism at 2.5 years old. Danny is now 16. And joining us from Los Angeles, actor Joe Mantegna, who won a Tony for his performance in Glengarry Glen Ross and now stars in the hit CBS series Criminal Minds. Joe's daughter Mia has been living with autism for many years. She is now 21 years old. So I'm going to start with you, Didi, to tell briefly your experience with your child and how he was diagnosed.
Well, firstly, Danny showed signs of enormous sensitivity to sound. That was the first thing that happened, that he could hear a plane coming before anybody heard it, and then it would make him have these horrible tantrums, and the tantrums would last 45 minutes, an hour. They would repeat again if we used a coffee grinder or a blender or a hairdryer. So we went to our pediatrician, and they tested his hearing. And he was also 2, so tantrums, terrible 2s, but it wasn't right. It was so sensitive. So finally, when we got the diagnosis, we looked into different kinds of therapies that could help integrate, these auditory integration therapies, music therapy, because when he'd hear music, it would calm him. So we were told, look for what's special and unique in your child. And music was something that calmed him, that he would listen to. Mozart. We went to Toronto to this Tomata system where they use Mozart to calm and to, because if a child is so sensitive to hearing, they shut down. And if they shut down, they can't learn. Yeah. And you want to get them to be more comfortable and relaxed. And
we'll come back to each of you and find out how your children are doing today, what progress they've made, but I want to get all the stories on the table. So Ken, tell us about your son.
Well, Christopher was our firstborn, so we didn't really notice any changes. We didn't know what to look for, really. It was really around the time he turned 3 that a daycare supervisor told us that there's something going on here. She said it looked like hyperlexia, and she was only comparing Christopher to another child that she knew had hyperlexia. And I go, what the heck is hyperlexia? So of course I, head for the internet, and I'm trying to figure it out and going, this doesn't make any sense. And we ended up going to a child psychiatrist, and she diagnosed pervasive developmental disorder.
And his typical symptoms at that time were?
Well, a lot of flapping, repetitive behavior, a real fascination with shapes. I mean, when he was probably 18 months old, he knew the difference between a hexagon and a parallelogram and a rhombus. I mean, he just shapes, any kind of diacritical mark in text, quotation marks, parentheses, anything. I mean, he just was absorbing all this information. And of course, I thought, well, I got a little genius on my hands, But then it was really around the time he was 3 that we found out really what was going on.
Okay, and we'll come back to hear more about Christopher. But I want to go to Joe now and have you tell us about your daughter.
Well, Mia was also our firstborn, and was born under fairly trying circumstances. My wife had an infection on the umbilical cord early in her pregnancy. And going in for a routine examination, they basically did ultrasound and through whatever other means realized they had to deliver the baby at 28 weeks, that it had to come out, otherwise the baby wouldn't live. So Mia was born at 1 pound 13 ounces. So back in 1987, that was one of the smallest babies born in California that year. And so she dodged a lot of bullets for those first 3-4 months. She was in the hospital in intensive care. And we had thought we'd pretty much dodged all those bullets. She was a strong baby and survived all the things that can happen to babies who are that premature. But at around the age of 2.5, we started to notice, I mean, now of course looking back on it, there probably were those little signs, things in terms of eye contact, as Didi said, things about the auditory sensitivity. And we were actually living in New York at that time, and I think we really started to notice it when we'd have her around other children of her age at around 2.5, and noticed the difference that these children had speech. These children were behaving in certain ways that were, ways that Mia was not behaving, or not having these. Her speech was not as good. Her eye contact was not as good. So of course it was then when we went in and saw a doctor in New York and got that diagnosis that all we parents get, that drops your heart out of your chest, and you're told, we think your daughter or your child has autism.
Well, again, we'll come back to and hear more about how your daughter's doing now, but I want to take the remaining time in this segment to just ask Ari about the issue of diagnosis. That is, how is it typically made by a doctor, and are most pediatricians or family doctors capable of making the diagnosis today?
Well, certainly over the years we've become more educated about how to make the diagnosis and how to try to identify these kids as early as possible. One of the things that the American Academy of Pediatrics now recommends is a screening test called the MCHAT, which we do at the 18-month and the 24-month visit. And I realize that we are going to try to get these kids diagnosed earlier than that, but we don't have a screening tool right now for that. But formally, we are screening at 18 and 24 months, and hopefully family practice doctors are also coming on board and trying to identify these kids earlier. We do really rely on parents, though, and we should ask you to bring your concerns into your pediatrician, because if there is a question with your child's development, we may not see that in an office visit, and if you see it at home, it's something you definitely need to tell us. And we are very aggressive about referring on to developmental assessment programs to get a full assessment if there is a concern in your doctor's office.
When we come back, we'll hear more from Joe, Dee Dee, and Ken about their personal experiences raising their children. We'll be right back.